Courage, when it is related to character, it is one of those intangibles that you actually need a pretty good example of a human being that has displayed the traits of what it means to be a courageous person. What kind of character traits do you need to develop in your life to be called courageous? This is why for this series event, for part 2 of this series, which is the topic of courage, we are showcasing the life of Chief Master Sergeant Richard Etchberger, Medal of Honor recipient.
He was stationed in Laos in 1968, running a radar installation in Laos when the site got overrun, and he ended up saving 6 of his airmen, and he himself then was fatally wounded when he boarded the aircraft trying to get off the mountain. I was 9 when he was killed, so a lot of the stories that I have come from the men that served with him and his Air Force records, and a lot of the interviews that I've done with the airmen that served with him. I think maybe like a lot of people that go in the Air Force, he wanted to be a pilot. So right after he enlisted, he actually went into radar bomb scoring. He was really a crack electronics guy, but he decided he wanted to be a pilot, so he went down to Georgia, and he actually failed the program medically, because when the instructor took him up in the trainer and he demonstrated a stall, Dad passed out. And what they found out, he had an injury in high school, a head injury in high school, and apparently that affected his ability to take some G-forces and so forth. So it's obviously really inconvenient to be a pilot if you're going to be passing out. So he was actually medically discharged from that program, and what he did at that time was he really sort of reinvigorated himself back into the radar field, and that's when his sort of career really took off, was after that point. So the Johnson administration wanted to bring Ho Chi Minh to the peace table because they thought if they could actually bomb Hanoi that they could bring an early end to the Vietnam War. So the Air Force designed a radar installation that had to be placed within 120 miles of the target of Hanoi, and so in September of 1967 they placed this radar installation in Laos. But the guys were discharged from the Air Force and hired by Lockheed Aircraft Services as civilians to run this radar installation. These guys were basically so good at their job that the North Vietnamese had to take out this radar installation. So in March of '68, they sent a sapper unit to overrun the site. The sapper unit came up over the mountain, killed most of the guys at the site, and Dad and 5 of his airmen were on a ledge on the side of the mountain. 2 of the airmen get killed pretty quickly, and Dad fights off the enemy all night and then finally calls for airstrikes on his own position. Helicopter comes in early in the morning at daybreak and lowers a couple slings down to the guys on that ledge, and Dad fights off the enemy and gets these guys in these slings and gets them in the aircraft. And finally, as he's about to be raised in the aircraft, another guy runs down a little path and jumps on the hoist with Dad, and the 2 of them go up in this hoist together. And once they're finally in the aircraft, the enemy shoots in the bottom of the helicopter, and only 1 bullet hits anything, and it's Dad, and he ends up mortally wounded at that point. This whole story is kept secret. In 1969, Dad is awarded the Air Force Cross, the 2nd highest award for valor in the Air Force, and it's with the understanding that when the war is over and the mission is declassified, it'll be upgraded to the Medal of Honor. And that didn't really happen. That didn't happen until 2010, 42 years later. The Air Force really wanted to keep this whole mission secret. The U.S. government wanted to keep it secret. 1968, remember, was a big time of turmoil in the United States. We had Bobby Kennedy is killed that year, the Democratic National Convention riots. There are riots all across the United States. The U.S. government did not want that we were in Laos come to light, and so they kept it secret. And basically what happens is General McConnell, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force at the time, he retires 6 months later, and this paperwork just sort of goes away. And it's not until 1998, when Tim Castle writes a book called A One Day Too Long, that this mission becomes more popular and people know more about it. And what happens in 2006, an airman reads this book, retired Master Sergeant from North Dakota, reads the book, and he writes a letter to his congressman, and that congressman contacts myself, and he says that this request to look at an upgrade of the Air Force Cross and the Medal of Honor has to come from a family member, not from one of his constituents. And so I write a letter to him asking for them to look at it, and unbeknownst to us at the time in 2006, we didn't know that that should have been a Medal of Honor ceremony back in 1969. We didn't know that the Air Force had said, we're going to give the Air Force Cross now with the understanding the Medal of Honor would be awarded later. So that comes to light later on in the whole process of trying to figure this out. It's more than just being an effective leader. I mean, Hitler was an effective leader. I think this trait of courage makes you a good leader, makes you a leader that men want to follow you. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that Dad was so popular with his airmen. He would go into the hospitals and bring these airmen from the hospitals to our house and have dinner with them. In fact, I'm still friends with a couple of those airmen who back in the 60s. I think he would say, take care of your airmen. That's the most important thing that you can do is make sure you're true to your word and that you take care of the airmen around you. I may never be in that particular situation, on a lonely mountain trying to save 3 other guys, but what can I do to sort of, I guess you could say, be a hero every day? What can I do to sort of emulate these traits, including courage, in my everyday life?